We have the best vineyards, we have the best soils, we have the best winemaker, we have the best. It's insane.
You really have to do something different. The good news is there's so many, the wine industry is so incredibly fragmented. It's unbelievable. There's so many dimensions on which we could innovate. Product has barely even scratched the surface of starting to innovate.
I think what we need is just incentive people to try different things, and mistakes is part of it. Successful.
Does the label look different? Does it telescope to a different consumer? Does it taste different? Do you use it for a different occasion? Are you telling a slightly different story? I'm even a big believer in brands as characters.
I think most of us, we get so involved on soils, climates, what we call terroir. I think we just try to sell that instead to sell the story behind of the product.
It's not that the wine wasn't delicious and well thought through, but it wasn't product first. It was story first. And then we developed the product accordingly. You might be 95% the same as your competitor, but how can you tell your story in a 5% different way, in a way that really matters for the consumer, not in a way that just, leans further on your grandpa's German heritage, for instance, than your neighbor does.
Wine is an emotional thing, and then we just see losing that emotional touch so much in the wine brands. Thank you so much, Courtney, to accepting this invitation for another episode for Vineyard Visionaries. We're looking forward so much to talking this episode about brand marketing. So guys, if you don't know Courtney, she's actually in US. Afternoon for her, morning for me here in Australia. But she has actually been very good, on different brands, not just the wine industry, and that's going to be very interesting to talk about it. But before I keep going to talking about yourself, I would like you to introduce yourself and then say why you do the job you do today, because I think it's so important for us to understand your brain, what's behind of the brain of Courtney.
Yeah, no, thanks, Priscilla. Thanks for having me. This is really exciting to be talking cross borders about this industry that we all love and what we can do to make it even better. So I am currently the founder of a company I'm calling the Outlier Initiative. And I am looking to bring exceptional storytelling and marketing and business practices from, I would say, the Fortune 500 to the small guy. My experience is entirely in beverage. 15 out of my 22 years I've been in the wine industry, so very heavily influenced by my experience in the wine industry. And I think the wine industry is a huge customer of these types of services and thinking. So not exclusively serving the wine industry, but definitely very versed in the challenges there, and am excited to see it survive and thrive. So it's a challenge for everyone. Before that, I came from Gallo, E&J Gallo Winery, largest winery in the world. I was there for 15 years. While I was at Gallo, I led marketing and basically the brand. So we're kind of mini general managers for a large portfolio of wine. When I left, I was managing about 25 brands and repositioning many of them and flying the plane while we were building it, because we had to be selling it then and we were totally turning them around. Before that, I led innovation for Gallo's wine portfolio, everything above $10, supporting 2 different business units. What I'm probably most known for at Gallo is the creation and launch of Apothic Red, which became the #1 red wine brand north of $10 in the continent. It was even bigger in Canada in terms of percentage wise than it was in the United States at the time. So that's my career with the wine industry. So it might be different than those that work for smaller wineries, but very kind of big company focused. Within Gallo, I worked on tiny brands, relatively speaking, and very large brands and everything in between. I came to Gallo because I was obsessed with wine. I'd always been a consumer of it since I was about 22. And I can tell you that story if you want to talk through it, how I got introduced to it. Yeah, we all have our story. We all have our story of how we got the bug. But when I found out that you could do what I love doing, which is marketing and building brands for the wine industry, it just had not connected in my brain prior to then. When I got a business card that said that somebody was doing that, from that point on, I'm like, that's what I'm doing. That is what I'm doing, period. That just sounds like heaven. And it really, I've really enjoyed it. And that's why I got into the wine industry. I got the bug. I took my certification exams, and I really tried to take my consumer packaged goods or fast moving consumer goods, depending on where you're coming from in the world, background with me. So unlike many, I came from the consumer goods industry. I'm a classically trained marketer, business school degree in marketing and brand management. I worked for some very large corporations managing brands and creating brands that were not in wine, and then tried to blend that with wine. So that is kind of where I'm coming from and where I was taught and the way my mind works.
Yeah, and that's actually my next question to you, because I can mention the names because I think the names is quite famous. Everyone's know about Coca-Cola and Danone, and then exactly that's what you did. You before you went to the wine industry, you have been quite involved and the big brands, and then that's the thing for me. I realized when I actually expanded my knowledge by learning different things, it's not necessary only in the wine industry. And then that's probably why your brain works so different
Yeah,
of most of us. It's just because you have a previous experience outside of the wine industry where we actually can put the dots together. So let's compare a little bit how was be brain manager and such a big and famous name like Coca-Cola and the wine industry. What's they making so different of the wine industry? Because we're struggling now. We need to learn how we can manage
yeah,
ourselves and our brain and how we build our brain. But Coca-Cola already built like a immense, like huge
yeah,
followers, and it's very respectful brand. So what's the points? What are the dot points? What Coca-Cola is doing
yeah.
so well, and then maybe what wine industry can learn it from?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I was not working on brand Coke. I was working on the launch of Coke Zero in the United States. And at the time, believe it or not, it was not expected to be big. Like, I swear to God. So it was very much, I took it as an entrepreneurial journey. And a lot of my colleagues at Coke were like, what are you doing again? Because we all know there's many brands that even these large companies launch that fail.
Yeah.
And so when you're just starting, people think that they're probably going to fail because a large percentage do. And that was my experience at Coke. So even though it's a huge company, I was very much kind of running a one woman show. It grew to be 70 million cases while I was there from zero. And we had a team of 3. So it
Wow.
was still very small. It felt like a small company, even, and we were a tiny priority in the grand scheme of things. So even though it's a large priority, it's all relative, I guess, right? Um, I think some things that I learned, and I didn't even know I learned them until in retrospect. So one of the things that I just took for granted, but it's still, you may know these things, but it's still hard to apply it to the next situation when you don't see it yet. In Coca-Cola, they do not tell you all about the brown carbonated beverage that they're selling you. They don't go into the details of the sweeteners and the chemicals and how they developed them. They really don't talk that much about the product. And if they do, it's about the benefit to you. It has no sugar. You can read between the lines. No sugar for me means I can fit in my jeans. I can lower sugar in my diet. Like, I get what that means. It's not like some features that I really don't understand how and if they impact me.
Like a
Um,
malolactic.
yeah, right. In wine, we get hung up on the product. We're very, very product focused. And I even fall into the trap even when I'm trying not to be. So just a quick story. After we launched Apothic Red and it was going gangbusters, the obvious question is what's next from Apothic? And as we were thinking through the options, we could do Apothic White. We could do varietals. We could do Apothic Cabernet, everything. Or we could do another blend. And it was real head scratcher because does the world need another blend? Like, it's okay. It might be a little bit different, but it's still a red blend that's going to be really hard to communicate to people. Again, this was back in '08. So I'm not saying it would be that way now, but and I think the aha moment came to me finally where I took the Coca-Cola learnings. It doesn't matter that it's another red blend. It matters about the story. It matters everything you put around that product. Does the label look different? Does it telescope to a different consumer? Does it taste different? Do you use it for a different occasion? Are you telling a slightly different story? I'm even a big believer in brands as characters. Is it a different character in the Apothic story than Apothic Red is? Is it its evil, devious brother? And so people identify with storytelling elements much more so. They didn't even ask what was in it. Like it was beside the point. And our red blend innovation just continued and really grew the brand. And it's not that the wine wasn't delicious and well thought through, but it wasn't product first. It was story first. And then we developed the product accordingly.
Yeah. And then that's exactly what I think most of us, we get so involved on soils, climates, what we call terroir, and things like that. I think we just try to sell that instead to sell the story behind of the product. And then maybe because we just keep telling the same stories, I guess when you go
Yep.
into wineries, I'm gonna connect this podcast with the podcast with Robert Joseph. He actually mentioned we just have two stories in the wine industry. One is I actually lawyer or any
Right.
engineer, whatever, and I love wine and I built my winery. And the second story is like my grandma, my
Yes.
grandfather
The
have the
family story.
winery. I am here. So I think that's the only two stories, or the most two common stories, I guess, we have in the wine industry is actually relying these two. And then I need to agree, like the two stories I hear all the time is about my family, or I am another wine professional, got love me with wine, and I just start my business in the wine as a, and then sometimes it's a hobby. Many of them is just doing like as a hobby because they have another career and they just have a wine industry as a hobby. And that's probably why we start to see much more wineries these days. But the two stories is very similar. Do you see the same things as well? That is your opinion. That's something we're missing in the wine industry.
So I think, yes, I agree with you that I hear that story quite often in the wine industry. But I think the main reason is because if you think about how you verbalized it, they both start what I call upside down thinking. So you're thinking about yourself. You're thinking about what product you have, what land you're sitting on, and literally where it came from and why you're there. And you're thinking about how you can tell that to somebody. And there's only so many different ways you can do that. If you start though with the market opportunity in your consumer, even if we're assuming you have the product you can't go back in time and modify it and make it different or really think about true innovation, which I know we can talk about further. But even if you're selling this essentially the same product as all of your neighbors, I think the only way in which you'd have the same story to tell in reality is if you both started with thinking about the consumer and said, I'm identifying the exact same consumer down to the demographic, the way they think, the problem that they have. I'm marrying that with my truth and what I have to work with. And I'm coming up with the same exact conclusion as my neighbor, pretty unlikely at that point, of the way I can offer them my value proposition in a way that's distinct from my competitor. And it doesn't have to be 100% distinct. We talk about the 5% differentiators. You might be 95% the same as your competitor, but how can you tell your story in a 5% different way, in a way that really matters for the consumer, not in a way that just, leans further on your grandpa's German heritage, for instance, than your neighbor does. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it's like a mostly like a selfish kind of a thing. We wanted to think about us when you
Yeah.
tell us stories, and then I think that's exactly what you should not be doing. I think it's what you say, it's just like put it like it making the person you're talking, like your audience or consumers, to be the heroes, not
Yes, that's
yourself.
exactly right.
That's
Yes,
that's a small way to say like how you tell your brain to make people the heroes, not you be the heroes.
exactly.
Because I
Exactly.
guess that's what are missing a bit in the wine industry. I guess we were just thinking we are the best, and then we forget it to actually ask people, then
Right.
actually or tell people they are the best. I think that's
Right.
probably something we missing, yeah, like compared
I
to
think so.
other brands.
And if you come from a large company, you don't have the luxury of sitting there and thinking, well, we're just going to keep producing the same product because you guys don't really know what you want anyway. And we're going to try to convince you, or wait until you change your mind and grow up a little and then come back to us. We have at large companies, no matter what the product, you have to change if it's not working. You have to listen to your consumers. You have to ask them for input, and you can't be too precious about things. I mean, maybe you have that one thing that's like your flagship that you feel so strongly about that even though no one's really appreciated it like you do, you still keep making it because it's your heritage blend or whatnot. Fine, but that can't be your entire commercial plan, right?
Yeah, and then that's probably something I wanted to my next question. So these other brands like Danone and Coca-Cola, they actually have some of this kind of strategy you just mentioned, like I'm do something that I'm very proud of and I do because that's me, but I do this other thing because I know consumers want to.
Right.
So there is such a strategy behind of these other brands.
Yes, I would say so. And it's not that we invent brands just to follow where consumers are leading, because that sounds like you don't have much of a point of view. But I think when I led innovation, for instance, at Gallo, we were starting off a new team. And the question was, what should we work on? I don't know. What should we work on? There's so many things we could do. So what I started with is kind of boiling the ocean. And because I came from other categories, I naturally looked to other categories. Trends don't often start in the wine industry. There's lots of places you can see the trends coming before they get to wine. In the United States, trends don't always start in the United States either. You can see the low alc trend coming from Europe far earlier than it got to us in the US. Outside the category, consumer macro trends, I would attend like future festivals to really like kind of get your brain working hard on what might be coming 5 years down the pike. I would attend flavor house presentations to see, not that we're necessarily going to put lavender flavoring in wine, but what's of interest out there? What are people talking about in spirits? What are people ordering in bars? What's coming down the pike in even like pharmaceuticals? What problems are people having? You eventually see those often show up in functional drinks years down the line. Not necessarily that wine can accommodate all those yet, but just understanding much broader than your own category what's out there. And then also thinking about obviously your gaps that are closer in. So the company I was working for, we didn't have a $15 Cabernet that was working really hard. So that was a priority, right? So we were marrying some of these much longer term out there thinking with closer in opportunities and coming up with a pipeline that balanced hard with easy, short term with long term. Like we hadn't figured out how to take alcohol out of wine yet by that point. So that was kind of a hard category. So I think that that's how I would approach things, not so much that you're just following where consumers are going, because consumers want brands that have a point of view too. They want to know that they're following something that's of interest to them and that's like-minded. They don't want to just tell you. And I have failure stories of times when I try to get consumers to just tell me and it doesn't work very well. But just being open and watchful to see what's out there.
Yeah, I think we need to get a little balance. I think we need to listen. I think it's important to listen to consumers because that's how we creating different things in the industry.
Absolutely.
I never see that. I never seen the non-alcoholic wines coming to get a place in the wine industry. I listen
Right.
to the podcast. You just give me the link, the drink business, where they talk about different flavors, wine flavors, and I didn't see that coming either,
Yep.
it's very interesting how people with different minds can create different things.
Right.
And then I guess in the wine industry, we have, I don't know if you have the feeling, and that's my question for you. We have like such a group thinking, so that how the way one should be and how the quality should be, and then that's the only way you make one in this way because that need to follow that way to do it. And then I think because that group thinking, we actually have a huge amount of people actually thinking the same way, and a huge amount of people deliver very similar products
Right, right.
and similar way to talking about even the service or sellers is pretty similar, and a
Hmm.
similar way to talking about the wine and a similar way to, it's all very similar. We don't see as much like a huge
Right,
difference. We can see
right,
a little bit, and I recognize some people try to do other things in the industry, but the changes is very little. It's
right.
nothing really um remarkable. They actually make it all these guys doing completely, it's a very little bits very like brains actually doing something more innovative that's making us
Yes,
to really go ahead. But it seems like when they do, it seems like everyone is just copying them. It's just like
yes,
when someone
right.
like very well, sadly everyone doing the same thing.
Everyone wants to
So
be butter, 5 years ago. How do we just make everything something butter? Because that must be what the key is, right?
so how are we actually making people, I think what we need is just incentive people to try different things, and mistakes is part of it successful. I think we just
Right,
see so it's scared to make mistakes, but if your business don't doing 15 to 20% of mistakes, so you're not innovative enough, so you don't
right.
try to do much. So how you can actually bring that the theories we say outside to the wine industry? Do you have the same vision as well, like the same way to see things? Do we actually a big group thinking, or what is your experience in the 15 years working in such a big company like Gallo?
Yeah, I think there definitely is groupthink. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the same handful of Venus vinifera varietals that we had hundreds of years ago, right? The product is largely the same for centuries now. And think about how other products have evolved in the last couple of centuries. Food products, packaging. I mean, the package is largely the same. It is a 5 serving glass breakable bottle that you need a special tool to open. Meanwhile, we've got car containers for olives. I mean, the olive industry has created ways for us to eat olives on the go and include them in our occasions, right? And we have really changed so little in response to consumers' lifestyles and occasions. So, yes, I think it's a lot about groupthink. I think that innovation comes in many different ways. I once applied for a role outside the wine industry. And I told the guy that I worked in innovation in wine, and he laughed and he's like, innovation in wine? What's that? I mean, that's what other industries think of us. And I got so mad. I'm like, we work our butts off to think differently, right? But like seriously, looking in at it, it is kind of silly. There's so many dimensions on which we could innovate. Product has barely even scratched the surface of starting to innovate. We have a very different American population than we did 100 years ago. They're bringing different foods, different tastes are popular. The current generation loves sour, for instance. We haven't seen an explosion of experimentation around what products are going to go the best with the foods that they're eating and how they're eating and how they're socializing, package implications, and occasion marketing occasions. I think about things, and I did not come up with this, some brilliant marketers have, but we talk about physical and emotional availability. So
Mm,
if it's not available when you want it, how you want it, could be cold, for instance, you're not going to buy it. However, if it's
yes.
also not in your mind, like, oh, it's a beautiful day, I'm sitting out at a cafe, you know what that makes me want? A cold glass of rosé. If that link hasn't been built, they're also not going to buy it. So it really has to be both. And you see some brands, if you start really dissecting marketing campaigns, really affiliating themselves with certain occasions. And it's not exhaustive. They want you to buy it in a lot of other occasions, but that's the one that they really want you to think about. I mean, Corona the beach, perfect example, right? Like, this is my beach drinking beer. I am chill. It's what I think of the second I see sand. I don't see sand. I only see my driveway. well, this is going to bring me the beach, right? Like that is years of hard work that they put into that I think wine can do equally well. There's so many dimensions on which we can innovate.
And I guess you just touched that point you just said. I think that's probably champagne is one of the best in the wine industry, still doing better than the other brands like sparkling. It's because we created that celebration thing. Because
Right.
when I celebrate, I bought like a champagne because tomorrow is my birthday and I wanted to celebrate. So I bought
I
a
love
champagne,
that.
I brought the champagne, because I
Yeah.
want to celebrate my birthday. And I think that's something like if you see all the categories and the different wines and stuff like that, the one is still doing well compared to the whole crisis we all know about it. Champagne is still doing better than most of the things, and I think it's because they created exactly that feeling we're talking about it at Corona on the beach and the
Yeah,
champagne
they've created a
celebration.
ritual behind it. And I mean, we've had this conversation. How do you have a ritual for Sauvignon Blanc, for instance? You know, I was in charge of selling a whole portfolio of Sauvignon Blancs under the same company, and they tasted very similar. And they were very similar price point. So how do you sell a whole portfolio and how do you direct a huge sales force of how to distinguish them and
Yeah.
get customers to buy more than one of them? A lot of it is selling on the story and about the occasion and trying to create a ritual.
And if you think about it, why consumers buy wine is actually because they have an occasion. Like I remember I was working face to face in the Murphys. People didn't come in to me and ask, "Oh, I want to like a winey, tasty plum, strawberries, lemon, lime." No,
Right, right, right.
it's like never coming to me like asking me like they wanted the profile or and they coming to me it's like, "Oh, I'll have a barbecue tonight and I'll need a bottle of wine to take to the barbecue."
Yeah.
Or I'm going to have a Tinder, someone to
Hmm.
me to like a romantic dinner. Do you have any recommendations of wines I can have with that girl or that man, whatever? And then that's just the actually the questions we answered every day when you work face to face.
Yeah, I bet.
The customers when it came into bottle shops because I was in the face to face with customers and that's what I noticed. People
That
didn't come to
is
me
so
about the flavors.
imperative.
Come
That is
to
so
me.
imperative, Priscilla. And that is one of the things that Gallo really instilled in me, much more so than my previous experiences. And since leaving Gallo, I've kind of been astounded at how little it's done in the big wide world. Get into shops, get into restaurants, get with consumers and talk to the trade. It is free. Big companies can't do it any better than small companies because it's free to everybody. But really get out there and listen to people. If you're not a frontline employee like you were, where you're hearing it all day and hearing what people's objections are and having to sell it, at least put yourself in that position and develop consumer empathy.
Yeah, because that is how I started to change. It's like I was very much in that. That's how I should do it. Like everyone else, I was
Yeah.
one of the most people. Like how the most people thinking about it, I was the same. But it changed my mind because people didn't come to me asking for the things I was training to
Right.
talking to them. Like was when you talk about people and critics and things like that for these people like 25, 28, 29 years old, they have no idea.
And they
They,
don't
they
care.
don't
It doesn't impact their night.
they don't read decanter, forget about it. We're just thinking like all of them read decanter, but they don't.
Right.
Like
Right.
they don't really have idea what we're talking about it. Like when you're talking about decanter scores and critics names, they just like who is that? Who is this guy?
There
Never
are
heard of.
very, very few products that consumers care deeply about. And wine is not on them, I would say. You know, the larger, more durable goods in which they're spending a tremendous amount of money, their homes, et cetera. But most consumers are looking for something yummy to drink. And that's
Yes.
where the relationship and interest ends. And we're over here on the other end of the spectrum trying to, you know, shove a bunch of stuff down their throat that we think is important. And it's just like we're speaking different languages.
Yeah. Another thing is what I want to talk to you. Like it seems like with quite changes as well with the generation now, we're not brand loyalty anymore like the previous generation. So we change it pretty much on that. So how brands keep positioning themselves, because it seems like people, like, it's a very few really people come to
Yeah,
the bottle shops and ask for brands.
very
It's, I
few.
can tell you, like, and then my hand was the brains is actually making difference. Because most of people just say, I want a yum sparkling, I want a yum
Yep.
ready, I want a yum Shiraz, I want a yum Malbec, I want a Cabernet Sauvignon. They know more about the grape, they
Yes.
actually the brands.
Those are
That's
almost the brands. Those are almost akin to brands in the industry. And there's certain categories in which it's even more so. Like we definitely learned that Chardonnay is a brand to most consumers in the US. My mom, just a personal story, she, bless her heart, she'd call me and be like, I bought one of your brands today. I'm like, what did you buy? And she inserted the name of a competitive Shiraz. And I'm like, no, that's not mine, Mom. She's like, but I thought you said you sold Shiraz. I'm like, well, it was Syrah, and it's a different country, different brand, Mom. But you know that is about as deep as it goes, right? You're like speaking a different language. But yes, I would agree. There's very few true brands in wine, and we say that kind of openly. Even at Gallo, we're endeavoring to build brands. And why are we building brands? It's because it gives you pricing power. Really, at the end of the day, if you look at it from purely a business standpoint, building preference that's irrational and it's just because of the package and the way it looks, and you have this impression that that light blue, baby blue, sparkling prosecco is better than the rest, you know, La Marca. It gives you the ability, you're not a commodity anymore, and no one wants to be a commodity, because then you're taken down with pricing and the next cheapest competitor comes up, and people will just switch. So that is really the point of brand building and making yourself differentiated, even if it's a tiny bit. So, but yes, I agree. It hasn't really come very far in the wine industry. You really have to do something different. And I think that the good news is there's so many, the wine industry is so incredibly fragmented. It's unbelievable. You know, coming from Coke, there was one competitor we cared about, one, and we each had half the shelf. Coke had half the shelf, Pepsi had half the shelf. In the wine industry, you've got thousands of competitors just in the same store as you. And you get
yes.
one facing usually to try to break through, and very little signage gets put up. So it's really an incredibly difficult battle you're fighting. But I think with the increase of selling wine online, the ability to speak directly to the consumer with social media instead of having to go through millions of dollars of print ads, which only the big guys could afford back in the day, and really the innovative techniques that are coming out in production, I think there's never been a better time to try something, even on a small scale, and get a loyal following. Now, you're not going to do that by doing the same thing as everybody else or telling your story in the exact same way. But if you can dial those things in and really create a plan that's going to speak to a certain person, you can get your message out there. And there's a lot of people paying attention, you know, a lot of industry investors, a lot of big companies that are paying attention to what the little guys are doing that's gaining consumer interest, because we all know we need consumer interest. And that's why you're seeing the acquisition of, this is a different category really, but Gallo just bought Montucky Cold Snacks here in the US. They're paying attention to what is interesting to consumers and who is building consumer loyalty and awareness, and because it's very difficult to build that. So I think that that is very good news. The impetus is on us to figure out how to tell the story and get that consumer interested.
And then that's just the thing as well. I think I wanted to talk about it. It's not necessarily the how many followers you have; it's how many engage you have. Because I think we get um, very confusing about numbers these days.
Yeah,
And it's something like as a marketing, a person actually in marketing, and you say something like very engaged followers, something you said on your words. Um, it's just so important because I think we just care so much about numbers, how much numbers, and we're going crazy and then buying followers and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, they're not engaged with your brand. They're not gonna not buy anymore. So numbers at the end of the day, it's not a big deal. It's more a big deal if you have some people
right.
actually and care about yourself, right?
Absolutely. I mean, back in the early 2000s when we were starting to see social media activity on brands, yeah, we were all out trying to get followers. Then we realized you could buy followers. So everyone started buying followers. Then we're like, what's the point? What are we doing? Like, this is having no effect on sales. And so I think that really, this is another topic that I think small wineries and businesses need to think about. Be careful about, all data is not created equal. Like, be careful about the data that really matters versus the data that just shows you did a good job in media buying, right? Like, are your sales going up in relation to the activity that you're doing? May not be short term. Brand building's not short term, but there are certain things that should have short term returns when you think about your overall spend and what you're doing. Are your brand awareness metrics going up? How are people think? What's the sentiment online about your brand? What's the engagement in what you're putting out there? If they're not engaging with your story, you can really tell pretty quickly as a leading indicator that that is not going to lead to your sales going up next year, because they're not engaging with your story. They're not buying it. So there's a lot of leading indicators you can put out there. Followers is a very bad proxy for whether people are interested. And of course, the cost in which you buy media is a terrible proxy for whether people are interested. It just shows you're good at buying media or not, or you need to change the way you buy media, but it's not going to necessarily change your sales in the long run and really create a brand that people are going to flock to.
It's about your vision about influencers, because it's something like people don't know. It's not don't know. We all know it existed, and we know someone having more power or not to be. I don't like this word, but influence people kind of thing.
Sure.
I don't like that word as much, but it seems like it became a new way to. It's very interesting. The whole marketing in general has been through like brain marketing. It's being very innovative. So many things, because now
Right.
we have social media, and then we became like actual influencers,
Yep.
and then how and the brains found the opportunity to work with influencers, and then it just became so new. And then I think the wine industry as a slow space to adapt to and to see things, and then how they can brain is actually manage themselves on the digital world. And then when you're talking about followers, social media's influencers, work with influencers, how they actually, what's the best way to to do things in the wine industry, because
Yeah.
it's different as well, like
Right.
to how they can position themselves on the socials and on the
Yeah.
digital world.
Well, I think, first of all, influencers are very important in the wine industry. And I think they're important in general, but maybe even more so in the wine industry. We were talking before we started recording about the power of putting your face on screen and having eye contact with people. And the reason is because people buy from people. Unless your owner of your winery or your winemaker is going to kind of be the face of the brand and put their story out there, it will always behoove you to have somebody who people associate with the brand. And if they admire that person and they've found them to be trustworthy and given good advice in the past, or they live a life that they aspire to live, or they have beautiful hair and you're selling hair care products, for instance, it's implied endorsement is what it is. You're buying earned media, essentially. You're paying that person to earn you the respect of their followers. So in that case, I think that their followers certainly matter when you're choosing who you're going to engage with, as long as they also have good engagement among those followers and they're not just passive followers. I think, again, it's got to start with the consumer. So who the right influencer is has to start with who you're trying to influence. The guy that influences my dad is very different than who influences me. So if you're trying to sell us both the same product, you'd have a very different approach. Once you are very tight on who you're trying to influence and what you think out of your story and your benefits is going to speak to them, which you really have to do also, really think through this, your value proposition, then you look at where they're spending their time. Where are they giving their attention? What people are they following? Who gets the most comments when they post something, and among who? And a lot of the sleuthing can be done by your everyday person. It's not like something that's reserved for big companies and big agencies. They do the same thing. All of this is publicly available information. I think the trap not to fall into is to think that your small sample of friends, though, is representative of the person you want to sell to. So you really have to get out of your own head and think about the person that you want to sell to, who presumably you've identified as being a good commercial opportunity to sell to, who they want to see influence them, and how that brand can authentically be represented by them, if it can, right? Like, not everything's going to fit, and consumers are very suspicious of people that don't seem to have any tie to the brand, right? Like, it has to be something that comes across as authentic.
And then so that is exactly what the point. I think we see lots of the social medias for some of the brands is pretty much only wine, like a bottle
Right.
of wine.
Here's another glass of wine today. Yes.
Yeah, and then the case is something like what they're missing the point when engaging on the digital, and specifically social media, because digital can be so many other things. And if you talk about digital, we're gonna talk the whole
Right.
of the
Right.
podcast, because digital can be a large amount of your business. But social media in specific, I guess, is something we can do much better. And then I'm happy to give some advices for that, because it's
Yeah.
a case we see lots of people doing bottles. I see like bottles of wine, and it's like,
The way you said that was great.
I just don't let me, when I saw that in my social media, it's just like, I don't feel like I want to even touch to like it.
Right.
It doesn't come in natural for me. It just
Right.
doesn't have emotion, doesn't have any connection. I don't know
Exactly.
how to explain to me, but that's my feeling. But you as a marketer, and in working in that position of branding and digital marketing people,
Yeah.
like, what's the missing point? Why do we not connect
Yes.
with bottles?
Well, it's called social media, right? Like, I think we have to take a step back and remember what the word social means. It kind of means person to person. It's a back and forth exchange. Usually back and forth human exchanges are not just pure fact with no emotion, right? Certainly not ones we remember, certainly not people we meet and end up thinking we like. So it's really like and this was your question about that article that I contributed to about wine is like dating. You're entering a cocktail party when you enter social media. There's a cocktail party already going on. You didn't start the internet, right? Like, you woke up that day, you're like, I'm going to post. There's obviously a stream that's been going on while you've been asleep. You're going to enter this conversation, and you're going to post a bottle of your product, right? Like, that's not a human. It's not really giving any value, presumably, depending what you write, to your person that you're trying to talk to, because it's talking. It's not a one-way print ad. It is to start a conversation. That's what social is. So is this going to start a conversation? Is this going to give usefulness in any way to somebody reading it? Is it going to give entertainment? Is it going to give empathy and affinity? You would not think of entering a cocktail party and sauntering up to a group of people who's been talking and trying to enter their conversation with just a fact-based statement about yourself. You've learned the laws of social norms by the time you're an adult, or even kids know a little bit better than that about what works to talk to humans and get good reactions, and that we kind of forget it all when we're trying to use it for marketing. Like, we really do have to think of our brand as a person incarnate. Again, this is the character that comes out. Who is this character? And if you are speaking on behalf of them, you're making them talk, essentially. Who can they help? Who are you talking to? First of all, again, it goes back to knowing your consumer target. Who are you hoping to help? You can't be hoping to help everyone. Whenever I talk to a client and I'm like, who is your target consumer? And they start with anyone who, I'm like, nope, stop. It's not anyone who. No. Crystal clear target in mind when you're speaking. That doesn't mean they're the only person you want to buy your product, but you have to have a target in mind when you're speaking. How else are you going to know what to say to them that's going to resonate, where to reach them, and what to offer them that's going to make them laugh or find usefulness, right? So I think we need to keep in mind that we're entering a social engagement with social media. If you want a one-way engagement, put up a display ad. But if you are entering social media and you're not getting interactions or shares or engagement, it's because you're not acting like a human. Like nobody wants to engage with you at that cocktail party. And that's what that article was about, basically. How is wine marketing like a cocktail party?
I love the cocktail party because yeah, if in the cocktail party when you try to make friends or try to talk with people, I guess you need to be human and you need to be
Right.
show curiosity about other people as well. It's not
Exactly.
just about look, I'm awesome.
Yes.
Look here,
Yes.
like I'm drinking champagne at this cocktail party. Doesn't matter. You need to if you wanted to make friends, you need to make some questions and you need to go
Yes.
around and show that you're interested about
Yep.
at the Thanksgiving cocktail
Yep.
party. And
Yep.
that's exactly what I like about the cocktail party analogy because you're
Exactly.
just putting that dot points, like
Yep.
how you behave in the cocktail party. And that's pretty much how you should behave in your social
Right.
media.
Right.
It's just
Right. That's exactly.
and then that's it, something like something we're talking about all the time. I think we try to show how expert we are, like
Right.
how great we are. But the thing is, we just need to be seducers, like seduce people, like we do in the cocktail party. I think that's
Uh-huh.
pretty much what your article is about. That's
Yes,
actually the
especially when you meet someone you like, right? Like you still don't hit them over the head with your story or your offering. You certainly don't ask them to marry you the first time you meet them. There are so many brands out there doing ads on social media that are just buy my product. I don't even have a relationship with you. I just heard of you a second ago. Buy my product. And then there's so many others doing ads that are just general. 90-point winning Cabernet from Napa. All right, what do you want me to do? Like, you really just going to put it in my court and I just have to click on it and follow it out of sheer curiosity? You're not telling them what to do. You're not giving them any kind of a thread to follow to further their relationship, no sort of offer. And I honestly think the larger companies have the harder trouble with this than smaller companies.
really, yeah,
Social media, I mean, I was doing social media pretty early in wine. And so early that I had to convince our general manager that it was appropriate for wine to be involved in social media, especially premium wine. But it's not yours anymore once you put it out there. It is a two-way conversation. You have to remember that. You're going to get negative stuff. You're going to, there's drawbacks. You're putting yourself out there. Like you do when you provoke about the wine industry on LinkedIn. You don't buy an article and just put it there and just read me and shut up. You are asking for input and you're going to have to be going back and forth. And I think with companies that there's so many different managers and levels and these brands are so big and there's risk. Even though we know that the average social media post is gone out of the algorithm like so quickly, right? It's not like it's forever there and people remember it a week later, unless it's egregious. There's just this level of like holding things to perfectionism, especially if it's like a luxury brand. And it's not
yeah.
just wine, especially if it's a luxury brand. I mean, 25 people have to see it and approve it. And it ends up looking like a glossy magazine ad, which is not what works in a two-way conversation.
Yes, that's a very good point. And that's probably why the brains like wanted to see luxury so much. That's why they
Yeah.
struggle. They have
Yeah.
so many goods, like so many people try to making perfect. And it
Right.
seems like the perfect is not the way we treat social media because no
Exactly.
one because if you're so perfect, you can't touch it.
Yes.
It's
It's not
it's
relatable. You're not humanized.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, because I think that is one of the thinking why small brands are probably doing better. It's just because they make it more relatable and more
Yes.
touchable. You can talk,
Yeah.
can
Right.
actually relate to luxury brand. But do you think luxury brands is going to be affected if they change the way they're doing social media? Like it's okay to have a luxury brand and both relatable, or
Yeah.
you should keep in doing that way. What's your thoughts?
I mean, this could be a whole separate podcast because it's certainly not just a wine issue. Like how does Prada act on social media? If you're going to put your brand in that environment, you have to understand the environment. Like, how does a top supermodel show up at a basketball game? She doesn't wear her runway gear, right? Like, she fits in at the basketball game, but still looks a little different. right? But like you have to mold yourself a little bit to the environment you are choosing to enter. And it depends on what you want. Do you want it to work or do you not want it to work? Do you want just a gorgeous curated Instagram grid that you can look back on fondly and show your friends? Or do you want interaction, shopping, discussion back and forth, and people getting intrigued to interact with you? I mean, you can try to have both, but I see people that are trying to have both really struggle to stop wanting that gorgeous Vogue curated board and really get in their own way instead of trying things. You know, sometimes you're going to say jokes that fall flat. You just are in a conversation. And if you're so terrified of saying a joke that falls flat that you just kind of shut up and try to look pretty at every party, you're not going to have a very, fruitful social life. Luckily, on social media, just like in parties, people forget what you said 5 minutes later. Just keep doing it. Just keep trying. Just keep showing up and be authentic.
Yeah, very good advices. And then what do people today, pretty much before mine getting close to the end, but the position, I wanted to ask you about the position because it seems like we are all trying to be a premium brand, or at least most of
So who's not premium if we're all premium, right?
like I don't know if you have the experience together like the same, but every single winery I go, it's all the same. Oh, we are the premium brand. We have the best grapes. Everything starts for the vineyards.
Right,
Because everything you need to start for the vineyards. We have the best vineyards. We have the best soils. We have the best
yeah,
winemaker. We have the best. We have the best. The best everything. But it's insane. But every single winery I go, I hearing the same, the best thing and the start of the product. And
right.
then I just see, yeah, and then this always start with I am a premium brand. We are finding wines, and I just don't know how I can actually, how they can position themselves is different because they all wanted to be the same, all wanted to
Right.
be premium, all wanted to be my finding wines, and I wanted to start with we do the best. So I don't blame them. Like just for people watching this, that's we have it to be the best in everything we do for sure, 100%. I give you my whole life to what I wanted to do it, and my whole heart for what I wanted to do, and I give my best always. And then I'm sure you the same, Courtney. But how brands is actually positioning themselves because that story became very repetitive for who the
Right.
consumer side.
It's all product focused. So again, think about whether Coke and Pepsi and RC Cola and all the other colas out there would argue about who is the bubbliest or who is the brownest. Like, yes, there are antes, there are requirements to be a delicious tasting wine that people trust is made well. But beyond that, I don't see much value in arguing who has the best practices to get the best grapes that then make the best wine. I mean, there might be some consumers out there that really notice the tiny nuances between one winemaker and another, one vineyard and another. It depends who you're going after. I'd say that the vast majority of people don't. If you are a delicious wine that's made with care, check. Let's move on to the rest of what you can offer me, right? What else can you offer me? Are you offering me a package that fits my occasion? Are you offering me an aesthetic that resonates with me? Are you offering me a product style that's going to complement what I'm eating or the mood I'm in that night? Are you offering a marketing story and world that I want to be part of, that I want to support your cause for whatever reason? Like there's so many other dimensions that are neglected when we just insist on that product, literal product and what's inside the bottle story and argue over the tiny little pieces of it.
Yeah, and then it's to ask yourself why as well is something we don't really ask in the wine industry. Why I'm doing this? I don't think we. Why am I talking about this? Why am I talking
Right.
that way? I think we stop ourselves to ask you why after we get adults. So I have a 2 years old, and I think probably that's why I ask myself why so much because she's literally
Yes. Yes.
ask why mommy, why
Yes.
mommy, had to using her why to myself in the wine industry, why I'm doing this, why I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And I think this is how we start to think it differently, and
Yeah.
we start to do rethinking.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean,
think,
I'll give you an example of that. I am working with a founder who has a small winery in Texas. And he also uses the best techniques, of course, and very premium equipment and tons of sustainability practices. And I did ask, why? Help me understand how we can tell this story. And what finally came out is that he has a sister who has an autoimmune disease, and they have many doctors in their extended family. And so they got really interested in a farming background. So they separately, the dad went into wine, and then the sister developed the autoimmune disease. They started getting really interested in how to modify their diets and their practices for her and for everybody else that wants to be healthier in that way. And that's his why. And it was not anywhere in any materials. I finally got that out. I'm like, this is gold. And really, truly, we can't, because of regulations, put this on the bottle, but the clean practices in which he employs are done so that the end benefit is that you're not going to get as many headaches, and his sister can drink the wine much more so than other brands. So I think you got to have a why. If there's nothing in it for the consumer, then you're just arguing for prestige sake, right?
yeah, exactly. And that's probably one the thing we try to change. It's just like it's not about you, it's not about the prestige, it's about the consumer as well. We can actually identify your consumers. And
Right.
then that's my last question for you for this podcast. So give us, please, three advices for people watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, like how we can do better as a brand, because we know having so many brands now
Yeah.
trying to position themselves on this very big, saturated market.
Yeah.
And we need to find how we can make things different. To be able to position ourselves as different of the thousands and thousands of wine brands.
Yeah.
So, what is the three advices where we should look at to be able to start it to thinking how I can make it different, I can position myself
Yeah.
different of the thousand and thousand of competitors.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
wanted to give your heart and your advices, your brain to us. Please help us
Yeah.
as a wine industry to be able to do better
Yeah.
from tomorrow or from today even.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very saturated in a particular area of the market. I think there are tons of areas of the market that don't exist yet that are very unsaturated. For example, the brand that I brought to your attention, Wonderwork, that you're going to link the podcast potentially from Business of Drinks. There's such a continuum. Consumers do not think as pure as we think they do. If I want an alcoholic beverage tonight, my options might be a lot more open than you're thinking they are. So I think that there's, first of all, true innovation is an option. You can think about how to position your product that's virtually the same as your neighbors differently, and I'll give some advice on that. But you can also truly innovate and have a very different product, and then position it accordingly. So I think working with the product that you have, my advice would be, and this isn't going to be shocking based on what I've said for the last hour, really choicefully choose your consumer. And that means renouncing other consumers. You have to choose. You have to be specific. Get to know who you think is your consumer avatar, we'll call it, right? Who is that person? Are they the person that lives in the big city that's out visiting wine country for the weekend? Are they the harried mom who just wants a glass to relax at the end of the day? Like, who is your consumer? And there's many different ways to do that. Get to know that consumer. Once you've chosen, immerse yourself in their world. It costs nothing but effort, but you have to learn to think like them, and you have to know them better than they know themselves. There's so many examples of brilliant marketing campaigns across categories that this is, I think, the underlying factor. And then really tie your story to that. You have to authentically be yourself, like the example I gave of the winery in Texas. But how do you marry that with the consumer that you've chosen? And what do you offer them that's of value to them? In wine, we don't need to drink wine. We might feel like we do some days, but honestly, humans would survive. It's not like I'm giving them this detergent that gets their stains out. We struggle with kind of functional benefits in wine, but there's
Yeah.
so many emotional benefits, and emotion is very rich territory. What are you giving them that hits on the things they might be interested in? And then that's what you lead with out of your story. You don't lead with the other millions of things that you could say. They're backup. So those are the three pieces of advice I think that everybody could follow tomorrow. And I think we'd have a lot more differentiation if we thought about those things.
Yeah, and I agree with you with emotional, 100%. Wine is emotional thing, and then we just see losing that emotional touch so much in the wine brands, and I think that's something we could really do better because they started to just tell stories about the same stories about the
Right,
same thing, fermentations and how the wine is made and how the wine
right.
is the terroir. I think if you touch anything, your story, whatever you feel like, whatever your story is with emotion, I think if that's what you're gonna see a big change in and the
Yeah,
communication side of the wine industry because I think that's
absolutely.
something we're missing a bit is like a innovative way to communicate wines because it's not working because if you're working with selling
Right,
wines you're not selling so it
right.
definitely
Let's do something different.
yes just to try to approach something different but it's been absolutely very enjoyable an hour with you today
Yes, me too.
to get your knowledge your brain and to be able to just get the thoughts like what the different industry does and what we can actually bring to the wine industry was very valuable at least for me, I learned lots today. And then I
I always
guess
send it
like
back to
lots
you.
of people listening to us probably haven't been learning lots of things as well. And we're just very grateful to have you in our podcast and to have your time and share your knowledge with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Priscilla. It's been great.